The train's whistle echoes across the empty Texas plains as iron wheels grind to a halt, spitting steam and smoke into the scorching afternoon air. The metallic screech of brakes mingles with the distant sound of cattle lowing, while the relentless sun beats down on the weathered wooden platform of what barely qualifies as a station. Mariana Duarte stands motionless beside her worn leather bag, watching the train disappear into a cloud of dust and cinders. The acrid smell of coal smoke burns her nostrils, mixing with the dry heat that seems to suck the moisture from her very soul. Around her, the sound of iron rails clicking grows fainter with each passing second, leaving only the whisper of wind across endless grassland. She carries the weight of ashes on her shoulders, her village in Mexico consumed by violence that swept through like wildfire, leaving nothing but charred memories and the bitter taste of loss. The trauma still echoes in her dark eyes, a haunting reminder of everything she's fled from, everyone she's lost. From the shadows of the station house, Elias Morales watches with arms crossed, his weathered face set in hard lines. The war veteran's gaze holds no welcome, only the cold calculation of a man who's learned that survival depends on recognizing weakness before it becomes liability. As he observes this solitary woman, something stirs in his memory. Images of other refugees he'd encountered during the war, displaced souls wandering roads that led nowhere. A rough-looking man approaches Mariana with the predatory confidence of someone who preys on the vulnerable. His tobacco-stained teeth gleam in a crooked smile, and the stench of cheap whiskey clings to his unwashed clothes. This is Jake Morrison, a man who makes his living from other people's desperation. "Don't you worry none, señorita," he drawls, his calloused fingers reaching for her arm with false kindness. "I know a respectable family house that needs help. Good Christian folks who will treat you proper." The words sound reasonable enough, but there's something in his eyes. A darkness that speaks of houses with locked doors and women who disappear without explanation. Mariana tries to pull away, her dignity intact despite the fear creeping up her spine. "Let me go," she says firmly, though her voice trembles with the weight of her vulnerability in this foreign land. That's when Elias finally moves. His boots click against the wooden platform as he steps forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. He doesn't need to draw his weapon. The steel in his posture speaks louder than any gun. "The lady's not interested, Walip," Elias states, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. Jake's grip loosens as recognition dawns. "Mind your own business, Morales. This don't concern you." But Elias has already made his decision, perhaps remembering other desperate souls who'd needed help when the world had turned against them. "I'm heading back to my ranch. You can come with me or take your chances here, but the station closes at sundown." The offer hangs in the scorching air like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. As Mariana looks into Elias's weathered face, one thought echoes through her mind. Nobody should face the West alone. The ox cart creaks along rutted roads that wind through a landscape scarred by recent conflict. Broken fence posts lean at desperate angles like grave markers, and scattered cattle pick at sparse grass that struggles to grow in soil still recovering from war's passage. Abandoned homesteads dot the horizon, silent testimony to families who gave up the fight and moved on to easier ground. Mariana sits rigid beside Elias, studying this harsh country that might become her new home. The financial strain of post-war reconstruction is evident everywhere, in the patched wagon wheels beneath them, in Elias's worn clothing, in the careful way he rations their water from a dented canteen. "The war hit this county hard," he says without prompting, following her gaze to a burnt-out cabin in the distance. "A lot of good men didn't come back. A lot of families couldn't hold on." When the modest ranch house finally appears, it looks small and vulnerable against the vast Texas sky. A windmill turns lazily, its metal blades catching the late afternoon sun. The buildings show signs of careful maintenance despite obvious age, evidence of people determined to make something lasting from whatever they have. Clara Morales emerges from the house, her slight frame moving with the careful precision of someone managing chronic illness. The dry Texas climate has been hard on her lungs, and her persistent cough serves as a constant reminder that this land doesn't welcome everyone equally. "Elias?" she calls, shading her eyes against the glare. Her voice carries surprise mixed with concern as her gaze settles on Mariana. Years of frontier isolation have made her wary of unexpected changes to their carefully balanced world. "Clara, this is Mariana Duarte," Elias says, his introduction brief and matter-of-fact. "She'll be staying with us?" Clara's eyebrows rise, but frontier pragmatism wins out over curiosity. She approaches with a tentative smile, though her hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the nervous energy of someone who understands the social complexities this arrangement will create. "Welcome," she says, then adds quietly, "Elias, Mrs. Henderson was here yesterday asking about our situation. The neighbors are already talking, and now you bring a Mexican woman without warning?" The words hang heavy with unspoken implications. Clara understands better than her brother how quickly gossip travels in isolated communities, how suspicion can grow into something more dangerous. Inside the simple house, Clara brings Mariana a bowl of warm broth and cornbread. Humble fare, but offered with genuine hospitality despite her obvious concerns. The gesture carries the weight of female solidarity in a harsh land where such kindness often means the difference between survival and despair. "My brother doesn't usually bring strangers home," Clara says carefully as they sit at the worn wooden table. "Especially not—" She pauses, searching for tactful words. "Mexican women?" Mariana supplies, meeting her gaze directly. Clara has the grace to look embarrassed. "It's just that people around here are quick to judge. There's a man named Victor Ramirez who owns the largest spread in the county. He has strong opinions about who belongs here and who doesn't." The warning is clear, though gently delivered. As evening falls and the family shares their simple meal, the careful politeness between them feels fragile, like ice forming over a river that might not hold under pressure. Outside, night sounds settle over the ranch, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the creak of the windmill, and somewhere in the darkness, the wild neighing of an untamed horse that seems to echo Mariana's own restless spirit. "Some things just can't be tamed," Clara murmurs, catching Mariana's attention drawn to the sound, "but maybe that's what makes them worth saving." In the days that follow, an uneasy routine establishes itself at the ranch. Clara prepares for her departure with increasing urgency. Letters from her fiancé Thomas arrive regularly, each one containing news of opportunities, waiting in Austin, and gentle pressure for her to join him soon. Her persistent cough has worsened in the dry climate, making the decision to leave feel less like choice and more like necessity. "Thomas has found us a house near the school where I'll teach," she tells them one evening, folding another letter with careful precision. "The doctor there specializes in lung ailments. He thinks the different air might help." The unspoken reality hangs between them. Clara's departure will leave Elias and Mariana alone together, a situation that will provide endless fuel for community gossip and speculation. Their evening meals become studies in careful conversation, each of them navigating the complex social implications of their unusual household. The wild horses' nightly calls seem to underscore their precarious situation, beautiful but dangerous, impossible to ignore. The first real test comes when Victor Ramirez arrives with two companions, ostensibly to discuss water rights and cattle prices. He's a prosperous rancher in his 50s, his silver-touched temples and expensive clothes marking him as a man of influence in the county. "Morales," he calls from horseback, his tone deceptively casual. "Came to talk business about the Henderson water access, but I couldn't help noticing your additional complications." From the kitchen window, Mariana watches the confrontation unfold while Clara stands beside her, face pale with worry. "That's Victor Ramirez," Clara whispers. "He controls most of the cattle sales in 3 counties. Cross him, and it becomes very hard to make a living here." "What business is my household to you?" Elias replies, stepping into the yard with deliberate calm. Ramirez dismounts, his movements carrying the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Some of us remember when this land belonged to the Herrera family before the war. Funny how quickly ownership can change when the right papers get filed. The veiled threat carries multiple layers, not just about Mariana's nationality, but about the legitimacy of Elias's own claim to the property through his military service. "I earned this land," Elias says simply, but his hand drifts toward his gun belt. "Did you?" Ramirez's smile turns cold. "Or did you just happen to survive when better men didn't? There's talk in town about your domestic arrangements. Some folks wonder if a man who can't maintain proper moral standards in his own home is fit to hold land that good Christian families could use." The insult cuts deep, striking not just at Elias's character, but at the survivor's guilt that has haunted him since the war. Clara gasps softly beside Mariana, understanding the cruelty behind the carefully chosen words. "Get off my land," Elias says, his voice carrying a dangerous quiet that makes even Ramirez's companions shift uncomfortably in their saddles. "Mark my words, Morales," Ramirez calls as he remounts. "This arrangement of yours is an affront to decent society. It won't stand. That Mexican woman, and whatever other strays you collect, they'll bring nothing but trouble to everyone involved." After they disappear in a cloud of dust, the ranch settles into an ominous quiet. That evening, the usual awkward politeness gives way to something heavier, the weight of a community's disapproval pressing down on their small sanctuary. "I should leave," Mariana says quietly as they sit around the table. "I don't want to bring trouble to your family." "No." Elias's response is immediate and firm. "Ramirez has been looking for an excuse to cause problems since before you arrived. Running away won't solve anything. It'll just convince him he was right to push." Clara coughs delicately, then speaks with unusual force. "Maybe it's time we stopped caring what Victor Ramirez thinks. This is our land, our home. We should be able to choose who shares it with us." Outside, the wild horse calls again, not in distress, but in defiance. The sound seems to echo their own growing determination to stand their ground against forces that would scatter them like leaves before a storm. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought not with guns, but with the simple decision to stay. Mariana murmurs, more to herself than to the others. But as she lies in her narrow bed that night, listening to the wind howl around the house, she knows that their real test is just beginning. Ramirez's visit has drawn the battle lines, and there's no going back to the careful neutrality of her first days at the ranch. As weeks blend into months, the rhythm of ranch life gradually transforms from mere survival into something approaching partnership. Mariana refuses to remain a passive guest in this harsh landscape. While Elias tends to the cattle and mends the endless fences that mark his territory, she carves out her own place through quiet determination and practical wisdom. Her touch appears in small but meaningful ways. New curtains sewn from Clara's saved fabric, a vegetable garden coaxed from stubborn soil behind the house, wildflowers planted in old tin cans that transform the porch into something approaching cheerful. The changes are subtle, but undeniable. The house is beginning to breathe differently. The creek behind the property becomes her daily ritual. Each morning she carries baskets of laundry to the rocky bank, kneeling in the icy water to scrub away the dust and sweat of frontier life. The work keeps her hands busy and her mind focused on growth rather than loss, while the sound of running water provides a peaceful counterpoint to the constant wind. But the true test of their evolving relationship comes with the wild horse. It's a magnificent creature, all muscle and spirit, with a coat like burnished amber and eyes that hold the untamed heart of the open range. Multiple attempts to break it have ended in failure and injury, earning it a reputation as untrainable. Even Elias, skilled with horses since childhood, has given up trying to master it. Mariana sees something different in the animal's restless pacing, recognition of a kindred spirit, both wounded, both displaced, both fighting against confinement in a world that seems determined to break their will. She approaches the corral slowly, carrying nothing but an apple from their precious stores. The horse immediately retreats, muscles tensed for flight, but something in her quiet Spanish endearments gives it pause. "Tranquilo, hermoso," she murmurs, placing the fruit on the fence rail before stepping back to give the animal space to choose. "I know what it feels like to be far from home." Day after day, she returns with the same patient offering, never forcing, never demanding more than the horse is willing to give. Gradually, trust begins to replace fear, first allowing her touch through the fence rails, then eventually accepting her presence in the corral itself. The breakthrough comes during a violent thunderstorm that transforms the ranch into chaos. Lightning splits the sky while wind and rain batter everything in their path. When a section of fence gives way under the assault, cattle begin scattering into the darkness. "The herd's loose!" Elias shouts over the storm, appearing in Mariana's doorway with water streaming from his hat. "I need help, or we'll lose half of them by morning." Without hesitation, Mariana pulls on her boots and Clara's rain slicker. Together they plunge into the tempest, following the sound of frightened cattle and the swing of Elias's lantern through sheets of driving rain. The next hours blur together in exhausting work. They guide panicked animals back toward safety, their voices hoarse from shouting commands over the wind. Mariana proves herself as capable as any ranch hand, anticipating the cattle's movements and never flinching when lightning illuminates the treacherous footing beneath their feet. When they finally stumble back to the house near dawn, soaked and covered in mud, something fundamental has shifted between them. They've stopped being strangers sharing space and become partners in the business of survival. Winter arrives with bitter cold that cuts through everything, walls, blankets, even hope itself. Food becomes precious as supply lines from town grow unreliable, and every meal requires careful calculation of resources against time. The three of them huddle around the fireplace in the evenings, sharing warmth and rationing conversation like they ration their provisions. It's during one of these quiet winter nights that their relationship deepens beyond mere partnership. Clara speaks first, her voice soft in the firelight. "If I leave, who will take care of Elias?" The question hangs in the air like smoke from the fire, heavy with implications about Clara's departure and the void it will create. "I'm not sure I'll stay," Mariana admits quietly, surprising herself with the honesty. But even as she speaks the words, she knows they're not entirely true anymore. The ranch has begun to feel like something more than temporary shelter. The daily routines of shared work, the small improvements she's made to the house, the trust she's slowly earned from the wild horse, all of it has begun weaving itself into something that might, with time and hope, become belonging. Different aspects of their lives create gentle friction that gradually resolves into understanding. Mariana's Catholic prayers contrast with Elias's war-born skepticism, but they find common ground in their shared care for injured animals. Her cooking methods differ from Clara's, leading to kitchen negotiations that end in laughter more often than frustration. when Elias attempts Spanish words and she adapts her recipes to available ingredients, their cultural exchange becomes a bridge rather than a barrier. One evening, as they tend to a calf injured by predators, their different approaches to healing, his practical, hers spiritual, combine into something more effective than either could achieve alone. In that moment of quiet cooperation, working by lamplight to save something vulnerable and innocent, they discover that their differences make them stronger rather than dividing them. The wild horse continues to serve as a metaphor for their own journey. Its gradual trust mirrors their own growing comfort with each other, its occasional skittishness reflecting their moments of doubt and hesitation. But progress is steady, measured in small victories: the first time it accepts a saddle blanket, the day it allows Elias to clean its hooves, the morning Mariana successfully leads it on a lead rope around the corral. Outside, the wind continues its relentless journey across the frozen plains, but inside their small house, three people who began as strangers have started to understand that survival might be just the beginning of what they could build together. The foundation remains fragile, but it's there, laid stone by stone through shared work, mutual respect, and the quiet recognition that sometimes the most unlikely combinations create the strongest bonds. "We're all just trying to find where we belong," Mariana tells the horse one afternoon, as spring begins to hint at its eventual return. But now she begins to suspect that belonging might be less about finding the right place and more about choosing to build something worth staying for. With winter's harsh grip finally beginning to loosen, the ranch settles into rhythms dictated by survival and growing intimacy. The cold that had forced them into closer proximity gradually gives way to the possibility of warmth, both literal and emotional. Clara spends most of her time preparing for her departure, carefully organizing her few possessions with the methodical attention of someone preparing for a new life. The evenings grow longer and more comfortable, lit by the flickering warmth of the fireplace that has become the heart of their small world. It's during one of these nights, when the wind carries the promise of spring across the plains, that Elias finally reveals the weight he's carried since the war ended. Mariana finds him sitting alone by the dying fire, long after Clara has retired to her room. In his weathered hands, he holds a tarnished military medal, his thumb tracing its worn edges with the unconscious repetition of old grief. The firelight catches the medal, making it gleam like a small, bitter star. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asks softly, settling into the chair across from him without waiting for invitation. Elias doesn't look up from the medal, but his jaw tightens, a tell she's learned to recognize as his way of wrestling with painful memories. Sleep doesn't come easy when the wind sounds like distant artillery. The admission carries more vulnerability than anything he's shared before. Mariana waits, understanding instinctively that this moment requires patience rather than probing questions. "This belonged to my unit, Commander," Elias finally continues, his voice rough with grief that time hasn't softened. "Captain James Morrison from Ohio had a wife named Sarah and two little girls back home, Emma and Grace. He used to show us their daguerreotypes, read their letters aloud during quiet moments between battles." He pauses, the metal catching the firelight again. The silence stretches, filled only by the crack and pop of settling logs. "The captain used to say we were fighting for something bigger than ourselves," Elias continues, his voice growing quieter. "Said the war would be worth it if it meant his daughters could grow up free, but when I pulled his body from that cornfield at Antietam," his voice catches, "all I could think about was how Emma and Grace would never know their father died face down in the mud, trying to rally men who were already broken." Mariana leans forward, drawn by the raw honesty in his confession. She can see now why Ramirez's taunts about better men had cut so deep. They echoed the survivor's guilt that has eaten at Elias like acid for years. "What happened to his family?" she asks gently. "Lost their farm while he was fighting their war. Sarah died of fever that winter, and the girls—" He shakes his head. "Last I heard, they'd been sent to different relatives, family scattered like dandelion seeds." Now she understands the shame that Ramirez had weaponized so effectively, not just about his humble origins, but about surviving when worthier men had perished, about coming home to find his own family's farm foreclosed while he'd been playing soldier. "That's why you live out here," she says, "and it's not quite a question. Far from anyone who might call you lucky." Elias nods slowly, his eyes still fixed on the metal. "I spent years buried in this land, trying to forget who I was, what I'd failed to protect." He finally looks up at her, and she sees in his eyes a pain that goes deeper than any physical wound. "But you made me remember that even scars can bloom into something beautiful." The metaphor hits her with unexpected force. She thinks of her own scars, the village consumed by flames, the family scattered to winds of violence, the long journey that brought her to this isolated place. All of it suddenly seems less like destruction and more like preparation for something she couldn't have imagined. "Not every root chooses where it grows," she says softly, her voice carrying the weight of her own hard-won wisdom, "but every root searches for soil that will let it flourish." The words settle between them like a prayer, and for the first time since she arrived, Elias truly sees her. Not as a burden or temporary guest, but as someone who understands the particular ache of displacement and the courage required to plant new roots in foreign soil. Mariana reaches across the space between their chairs and gently takes the medal from his hands. She examines it carefully, reading the inscription that honors Captain Morrison's service, then hands it back with ceremonial gravity. "He would be proud," she says simply, "not because you survived, but because you're using that survival to shelter others. That little girl upstairs who depends on your protection, she is his legacy too. Every life you save honors his memory." The fire burns lower, but neither of them moves to add more wood. Some conversations deserve to end in gathering darkness, with only the warmth of shared understanding to light the way forward. Outside, the wind begins to calm, and in the growing quiet, they can hear the subtle sounds of the ranch settling around them, the creak of wood, the distant lowing of cattle, the whispered promise that spring will eventually come. "Clara's leaving soon," Elias says, though they both know this already. "And when she does, this place will be quieter," Mariana finishes, not quite ready to address what he's really asking. But Elias has found his courage now, borrowed perhaps from her quiet strength. He sets the medal aside and leans forward, his eyes meeting hers with intensity that makes her heart race. "If you stay, this place could stop being just land. It could become a home." The offer hangs in the air between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Mariana feels the weight of the choice, not just about remaining at the ranch, but about allowing herself to believe that she might deserve the belonging she's spent so long seeking. "I'm frightened," she admits, the confession surprising them both with its honesty. "So am I," Elias replies, "but I'm more frightened of what happens if you leave." "Some of the strongest trees grow in the harshest soil," Mariana murmurs, and for the first time since she's known him, Elias smiles, a real smile that reaches his eyes and transforms his weathered face. Love doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and roses. Sometimes it grows quietly in the space between shared sorrows and mutual hope. Spring arrives with the suddenness of a revelation, transforming the harsh winter landscape into something that dares to promise renewal. The warmth brings Clara's departure date closer with each passing day, a reality that hovers over the ranch like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. The morning Clara leaves dawns bright and merciless. She stands on the porch in her traveling dress, a small trunk containing everything she owns, waiting beside her feet. Her eyes shine with excitement and terror in equal measure as she clutches a letter from Thomas like a shield against uncertainty. "The train to Austin leaves at noon," she says, checking her small pocket watch for the third time. "Thomas will meet me at the station, and then—" She trails off, overwhelmed by the magnitude of change ahead. Elias loads her trunk onto the wagon with unnecessary care, checking the ties twice despite the short journey to town. His discomfort with goodbyes shows in the rigid set of his shoulders and the way he avoids looking directly at his sister. Mariana embraces Clara with genuine warmth, surprised by how much she'll miss this fragile woman who first offered her soup and tentative friendship. "Write to us," she says. "Tell us about your new life, your students." "I will," Clara promises, then looks directly at Mariana with meaning, clear, even unspoken. "Take care of him. He's stronger than he knows, but he's been alone too long. He needs someone who understands that strength and gentleness aren't opposites." Sorry. The wagon disappears down the dusty road, leaving behind a silence different from any that came before. This isn't the comfortable quiet of evening or the expectant hush before dawn. This is the hollow echo of absence, magnified by the sudden realization that the house now shelters only two people against the vast indifference of Texas. For several days, they move around each other like dancers, learning new choreography. Routines that had included Clara, 3 places at meals, 3 voices in conversation, 3 people to share the endless work of survival, must be reinvented for 2. Mariana catches herself setting an extra plate at breakfast from habit, quietly removing it before Elias notices her mistake. The silence grows heavier with each passing day, weighted with unspoken questions and half-formed expectations. Their winter intimacy by the fireplace now seems fragile in daylight, threatened by the practical reality of 2 unmarried people sharing a home in a place where reputation carries the force of law. During one of her solitary walks to the creek, a ritual that has become both necessity and escape, Mariana discovers something that changes everything. At first, she mistakes the bundle of rags beside the water for debris washed downstream by spring runoff, but something about its shape catches her attention, and when she investigates, she finds a girl of perhaps 8 years old, unconscious and barely breathing. The child's dark hair is matted with blood, her clothes torn by violence and desperate flight. Even in unconsciousness, the girl's face tells a story Mariana recognizes with horrible familiarity, the slack features of someone who has witnessed unspeakable trauma, the way her small hands clutch at nothing, even in sleep. This is a survivor, but barely, carrying the same haunted emptiness that Mariana sees in her own reflection. "Rosita," the child whispers when Mariana lifts her, the single word spoken in Spanish like a prayer or final confession. Without hesitation, Mariana carries the girl back to the ranch. She doesn't ask Elias's permission. She simply appears in the kitchen doorway with the child in her arms and begins issuing orders with an authority that brooks no argument. "Hot water and clean cloth," she commands, "and that bottle of whiskey you keep hidden behind the flour sack." They work together to clean the child's wounds and coax some broth between her cracked lips. Rosita drifts in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking in rapid Spanish that tells fragments of a story too terrible for such young lips. Riders in the night, flames consuming everything familiar, running until her legs failed and darkness claimed her. When the immediate medical crisis passes and the child sleeps peacefully in Clara's former bed, Elias and Mariana face the question that hangs between them like smoke from a gun barrel. "We can't keep her," Elias says, but his voice lacks conviction even as he speaks the words. "Why not?" Mariana's response carries fierce determination. "Because she's Mexican, because she's an orphan, because caring for her might inconvenience your neighbors? Because this isn't an orphanage, and we're not married. What will people think?" The words emerge harsher than he intends, and he immediately regrets them when he sees how they land. I know what you really mean. Mariana stands abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You mean that I'm still just a guest here, and guests don't make permanent decisions about family. The accusation stings because it contains enough truth to wound. But as Elias looks at Mariana's blazing eyes, at the sleeping child upstairs who has already lost everything once, he realizes he's facing a choice that will define not just their household, but his own character. That child has lost everything, Mariana continues, her voice steady despite the emotion underlying it, just like I did, just like you did when war took your family and turned you into a stranger in your own country. Are we going to be the kind of people who turn away from that pain, or are we going to be something better? Tio. The ultimatum hangs in the air between them, final and non-negotiable. In her face, Elias sees the same determination that had tamed the wild horse, the same steel that had helped him save cattle during the storm. That night, as evening settles over the ranch, they sit around the kitchen table sharing a simple meal of bread and soup. A third bowl sits cooling on the counter, waiting for Rosita to wake, but also serving as a silent declaration that their family has grown by one. The adoption isn't formalized with papers or legal ceremonies. It's sealed instead with small acts of faith, the extra plate set without discussion, a rag doll sewn from scraps of Clara's old dresses, bread broken and shared without ceremony. As Pastor Mitchell arrives the next morning to assess the situation, Mariana and Elias stand united on their porch, presenting a front that dares anyone to question their right to protect the innocent. Family isn't just blood. It's the choice to stand together when the world tries to tear you apart, Mariana says quietly, her hand finding Elias's scarred one. But what they don't yet realize is that their decision to protect one vulnerable life has painted a target on all their backs, and Victor Ramirez is already planning his next move. In the weeks that follow Rosita's arrival, the ranch transforms in ways both visible and profound. The child, initially shy and startled by sudden movements, begins to emerge from her shell like a wildflower pushing through cracked earth. Her laughter, when it finally comes, rings across the property with the clear sweetness of church bells, filling spaces that had been silent too long. Mariana watches the girl's gradual healing with the fierce protectiveness of a mother wolf. She teaches Rosita to gather eggs without frightening the chickens, to recognize which plants in the garden are ready for harvest, and most importantly, how to approach the wild horse with the same patience and gentle persistence that had won its trust months before. Tranquilo, hermoso, Rosita whispers to the animal, echoing Mariana's Spanish endearments. The horse, now gentle under Mariana's consistent care, allows the child to stroke its neck through the fence rails. He knows we understand him, doesn't he? Yes, mija, Mariana replies, using the endearment that comes naturally now. He knows we've all been hurt, and we're all learning to trust again. But even as their small family finds its rhythm, the outside world intrudes with increasing subtlety. Victor Ramirez, frustrated by his inability to intimidate Elias into submission, turns his attention to economic warfare, wielding his influence like a weapon sharpened by years of practice. The first signs are almost imperceptible, deliveries from town arriving 3 days late instead of on schedule. The general store's prices mysteriously double when Mariana approaches the counter, forcing her to choose between soap and sugar for their meager household budget. The blacksmith suddenly finds himself too busy to shoe their horses, leaving them dependent on worn equipment that grows more dangerous with each passing day. In town, the whispers follow Mariana like shadows, but now they're accompanied by something more troubling. A calculated silence from neighbors who had once offered polite nods. Women cross the street rather than acknowledge her presence, their skirts rustling with the sound of doors closing against her family's future. But not everyone participates in this cruel theater. Mrs. Sarah Coleman, the doctor's wife, approaches Mariana outside the church after Sunday service. Looking nervously over her shoulder, she speaks in hurried whispers. "There's talk," she says, pressing a small package of herbs into Mariana's hands. "Ramirez is organizing meetings, telling folks that your arrangement threatens property values. He's got some of the men convinced that if this stands, every drifter and outcast will come looking for handouts. The warning carries more weight because it comes from someone with everything to lose by offering it. Mrs. Coleman's husband depends on community goodwill for his practice, making her gesture one of genuine courage." "What should we do?" Mariana asks. "Stay strong. There are more good people here than Ramirez realizes, but fear makes cowards of us all." She squeezes Mariana's arm briefly. "That little girl deserves the love you're giving her. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Back at the ranch, the effects of this organized pressure manifest in ways that make daily life increasingly precarious. Their cattle buyer from San Antonio suddenly finds their beef below standard, forcing them to accept half the expected price. Feed deliveries become irregular, and twice they wake to find their vegetable garden trampled, not by wild animals, but by boot prints too deliberate to be accidental. The economic stranglehold tightens like a noose. Elias meets each setback with grim determination, taking on extra work mending neighbors' fences for cash, selling precious tools to buy necessities. But Mariana sees the toll it takes, the way he calculates every expense twice, the dark circles under his eyes that speak of nights spent planning for an uncertain future. The breaking point comes when the threats extend directly to Rosita. The child has been helping Mariana hang laundry behind the house when 3 riders approach from the south, their horses kicking up dust clouds that announce trouble long before they arrive. Ramirez leads them, flanked by 2 men whose faces Mariana doesn't recognize, but whose intentions are written clearly in their hostile postures. "Afternoon, ladies," Ramirez says, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. His eyes linger on Rosita with an expression that makes Mariana's blood turn cold. Lovely day for domestic chores, isn't it? Mariana instinctively moves between the riders and the child, her hand finding Rosita's shoulder. "What do you want, senor?" "Just being neighborly," Ramirez replies, but his smile never reaches his eyes. "Checking on the welfare of this poor child. You see, there's been considerable discussion in town about proper care arrangements. Some concerned citizens wonder if she might benefit from placement with a legitimate family, a legal family with proper documentation." The threat crystallizes with terrifying clarity. Mariana feels Rosita press closer against her side, the child's body trembling with remembered trauma. "She is with her family," Mariana says firmly, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Is she?" Ramirez's tone grows harder, more menacing. "Because I don't see any legal papers, no official adoption proceedings, no documentation proving you have any right to keep her." He leans forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carries more menace than shouting. "Curious thing about undocumented children, they have a way of disappearing into the system. Sometimes they end up in institutions back east, where they learn proper American values. Sometimes they just vanish entirely." One of his companions, a nervous-looking man named Pete Williams, shifts uncomfortably in his saddle. "Victor, maybe we should—" "Should what?" Ramirez snaps, his mask of civility slipping. "Should allow this Mexican woman to corrupt an innocent child with her foreign ways? Should we stand by while she fills the girl's head with Catholic superstitions and Spanish gibberish?" The raw hatred in his voice reveals the true depth of his prejudice, and even Williams looks ashamed of his association with such venom. That evening, Rosita clings to Mariana with desperate intensity, her small hands fisted in the fabric of her dress. The child speaks little, but her nightmares tell the story her waking mind won't voice. Dreams filled with riders and flames and the terrible loneliness of being utterly alone in the world. "He's trying to take me away, isn't he?" she finally whispers as Mariana braids her hair before bed. The question hangs in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Mariana could lie, could offer false reassurances, but something in the child's eyes demands honesty. "He's trying," Mariana admits, "but he won't succeed. Elias and I won't let him." "Promise?" The word comes out small and broken. "I promise, Mija. Sometimes the strongest roots grow in the hardest ground, and we've already put down roots here, all of us together." But even as she makes the vow, Mariana knows that Ramirez has found their weakness. The unofficial nature of their family, which had felt like freedom from bureaucratic interference, now exposes them to dangers they hadn't anticipated. Love and commitment mean nothing in the eyes of the law, and the law, in this isolated corner of Texas, is whatever Victor Ramirez says it is. Elias finds her sitting on the porch long after Rosita has fallen asleep, staring out at the darkness that seems to press closer to the house with each passing hour. "He's not going to stop," she says without preamble. "No," Elias agrees, settling beside her on the wooden steps. "He's not. Maybe I should take Rosita and leave, go somewhere he can't follow." The suggestion hangs between them for a long moment before Elias responds, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Running didn't work the first time," he says quietly. "Sometimes a person has to stand their ground, regardless of the cost." Lee. But as they sit in the gathering darkness, both of them know that the cost of standing their ground might be higher than any of them are prepared to pay. The question isn't whether they're strong enough to weather this storm. It's whether their love for each other is powerful enough to survive what's coming next. The confrontation comes 3 days later, arriving with the dawn like a fever breaking. Mariana is feeding the chickens when she spots the dust cloud rising in the distance. Too large for casual visitors, too deliberate to be anything but trouble approaching with lethal intent. "Elias!" she calls, dropping the grain bucket and running toward the house. "Riders coming! Many of them!" Elias emerges from the barn, his rifle already in his hands, his face grim with the recognition that this day had always been inevitable. He counts the silhouettes against the morning sky. 6 men all armed, riding with the purposeful urgency of those who've come to finish something once and for all. But something's different this time. One of them wears a badge that glints like a warning in the early light. "Get Rosita and stay inside," he commands, but Mariana is already moving, her instincts honed by too many encounters with violence. Inside the house, Rosita sits at the kitchen table, carefully practicing her letters on a piece of precious paper. The sight of her small hand gripping the pencil with determined concentration breaks something in Mariana's heart. This child who has already lost everything shouldn't have to face the possibility of losing her new family as well. "Mija, we need to go to the back room now," Mariana says, keeping her voice calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Remember the game we talked about, where you stay very quiet and very still?" Rosita's eyes widen with understanding. She's too young to fully comprehend the politics and prejudices that have brought this moment to their door, but she's old enough to recognize danger. Without a word, she takes Mariana's hand and follows her to the small storage room where they have prepared for exactly the scenario. Outside, the sound of horses grows louder, punctuated by the harsh voices of men who've convinced themselves that violence serves justice. Through the thin walls, Mariana can hear Ramirez's voice rising above the others, drunk on power and righteous indignation. "Elias Morales," he shouts, "come out and face the consequences of your actions. Time to settle this according to law and decency." Elias steps onto the porch, his rifle held ready, but not yet aimed. He immediately notices Sheriff Davies among the group, a weak man easily swayed by whoever holds the most influence. in the county. The presence of legal authority, however corrupted, changes the entire dynamic. "This is my land, Ramirez," Elias calls back, his voice steady, despite the overwhelming odds. "You and your men are trespassing." "Not according to Sheriff Davies," Ramirez replies with obvious satisfaction. "We have legitimate concerns about the welfare of that child, and the sheriff has agreed to investigate the irregularities of your household arrangements." Sheriff Davies shifts uncomfortably in his saddle, avoiding Elias's direct gaze. "Sorry, Morales. There's been complaints filed. Official complaints about improper guardianship and moral conduct. I got to look into it." Several of Ramirez's men exchange uneasy glances. Pete Williams looks particularly conflicted, his conscience clearly warring with his loyalty to the man who employs half the county's ranch hands. "Victor," Williams says quietly, "maybe we should let the sheriff handle this legal-like. No need for all of us to be here." "Shut up, Pete," Ramirez snaps, his mask of legal propriety slipping. "This isn't just about one Mexican woman and her bastard child. This is about the kind of community we're going to have. Are we going to be decent Christian folks, or are we going to let every vagrant and outcast think they can plant themselves wherever they please?" Making a decision that terrifies and liberates her in equal measure, Mariana steps out of the storage room and picks up the shotgun that Elias keeps loaded by the kitchen door. Rosita starts to follow, but Mariana turns back with a look that stops the child in her tracks. "Stay here, mija," she whispers. "No matter what you hear, stay here until I come back for you." The front door opens with a creak that seems to echo across the ranch yard like a gunshot. Mariana steps onto the porch beside Elias, the shotgun held with competent familiarity, another skill learned from necessity in a hard land. "She's not alone," Mariana says simply, her voice carrying across the yard with quiet authority. "And neither are you." The sight of her armed and defiant seems to unbalance even Sheriff Davies. A Mexican woman with a gun challenges not just Ramirez's immediate plans, but the entire social order as they understand it. "Ma'am, you need to put that weapon down," Davies says nervously. "This is official business." "What's official about threatening a child?" Mariana replies, her aim never wavering from Ramirez's chest. "This land wasn't given to us. We planted ourselves here. We earned our place with sweat and sacrifice, and we won't be driven away by fear masquerading as law." The standoff stretches taut as a wire, each side waiting for the other to make the first move. Pete Williams grows increasingly agitated, his horse sidestepping nervously beneath him. Several other riders begin to look genuinely uncomfortable with the situation they've found themselves in. Coming to intimidate a family suddenly feels different when faced with the reality of threatening a woman and child. It's Williams who breaks first. Maybe it's the sun in his eyes, maybe it's his horse's nervous prancing, but his rifle discharges accidentally as he tries to steady it, sending a bullet whistling past Elias's head to splinter the porch railing. The accidental shot unleashes chaos. Elias drops and rolls, coming up firing. His first shot takes Williams out of the saddle, not killing him, but wounding him badly enough to remove him from the fight. Mariana's shotgun booms like thunder, the spread of shot catching another rider's horse and sending both horse and rider crashing to the ground in a tangle of screaming animal and cursing man. Sheriff Davies, realizing his mistake too late, tries to restore order while staying out of the crossfire. "Stop shooting! Everyone stop shooting!" The battle dissolves into confusion, horses rearing and plunging, men shouting contradictory orders, the sharp crack of rifles mixing with the deeper roar of the shotgun. Dust fills the air, making targets unclear and shots uncertain. At that moment, the wild horse, spooked by the gunfire and chaos, breaks free from its corral. The magnificent animal explodes into the open space like a force of nature unleashed, its hooves thundering across the hard-packed earth. It doesn't attack anyone. It simply runs, wild and free, cutting between the fighting men and causing their mounts to rear and scatter in panic. In the confusion, Elias gets a clear shot at Ramirez. The bullet takes the older man in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around in his saddle, but not dropping him. Blood streams down his arm, but his eyes burn with undiminished hatred, even as his practical plans collapse around him. "This isn't over, Morales," he screams as his remaining men help him retreat, their planned intimidation turned into humiliating defeat. "You hear me? This isn't over." Sheriff Davies, his authority thoroughly compromised, can only watch helplessly as the vigilante mob he'd enabled retreats in disorder. But Ramirez's words ring hollow as they disappear in another cloud of dust, leaving behind only the wounded Williams groaning in the dirt and the gradual settling of silence over the battlefield. Elias sinks to his knees, adrenaline and blood loss from a graze across his ribs making him suddenly dizzy. Mariana runs to him, her hands already assessing the wound with the competent care of someone who's tended injuries before. "It's not deep," she says, relief evident in her voice, "but it needs cleaning and binding." Rosita emerges from the house, her face pale but her eyes bright, with the fierce pride of someone who has witnessed courage triumph over cruelty. She runs to Elias and Mariana, throwing her small arms around both of them in an embrace that speaks louder than any words. The real victory isn't that they survived the fight, though survival matters. The real victory is that they fought as a family, united against forces that would scatter them like leaves before a storm. As they help each other into the house, the wild horse continues to run circles around the ranch, its joyful freedom a perfect metaphor for what they've all won in this moment. The real victory isn't that they survived the fight, it's that they fought as a family, and nothing Ramirez or anyone else can do will ever change that fundamental truth. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, the Texas sun rises over a ranch that has been transformed in ways both visible and profound. The same dawn light that once illuminated a place of silent isolation now touches a homestead alive with the sounds of genuine belonging, laughter echoing from the kitchen, the steady rhythm of daily work shared between willing hands, and the gentle murmur of conversations that no longer carry the weight of unspoken questions. Elias stands on the porch, his left shoulder bearing a permanent reminder of that violent morning. The bullet wound has healed, but it left behind a scar that pulls tight in cold weather and aches before storms. A physical manifestation of the price they paid for their right to choose their own family. He rolls his shoulder carefully, working out the familiar stiffness that serves as both burden and badge of honor. The pain no longer troubles him the way it once might have. Like the emotional scars he carries from the war, this physical reminder has become part of his story, rather than something that defines his limitations. When Rosita asks about it, as children inevitably do, he tells her simply, "Some wounds mark us so we remember what we fought for." In the distance, the wild horse that once paced the corral in restless captivity now grazes freely in the far pasture, its coat gleaming like burnished copper in the morning light. The animal has become a living symbol of their journey, from fear and isolation to trust and belonging. Rosita visits it daily, bringing apples and carrots, speaking to it in the mixture of Spanish and English that has become the natural language of their household. The most concrete symbol of their triumph stands at the edge of their property. Official papers from the district judge formally recognizing Rosita's adoption. The legal victory had come at a cost. Weeks of testimony, character witnesses, and legal fees that stretched their resources thin. But it guaranteed that Ramirez could never again threaten their child's security. The judge, an elderly man named Harrison, who had grown tired of Ramirez's political manipulations, had made his feelings clear during the final hearing. This court recognizes that family is created by love and commitment, not by accidents of birth or narrow prejudices. In town, the social transformation has been gradual but unmistakable. The Henderson family, respected pillars of the community, had surprised everyone by publicly defending the Morales family at a church meeting. Mrs. Henderson's words still resonate through the county. If we judge families by the love they show rather than the papers they carry, the Morales household stands as an example to us all. The general store now serves them with genuine courtesy rather than grudging tolerance. Children who once hid behind their mother's skirts now wave enthusiastically at Rosita, drawn by her infectious laughter and the family's reputation for quiet generosity. The doctor's wife, Sarah Coleman, has become a genuine friend, often joining Mariana for coffee while their children play together in the afternoon sun. Even more telling is Victor Ramirez's fall from grace. His arm never properly healed from Elias's bullet, leaving him with limited mobility and a constant reminder of his failed crusade. More damaging was the social isolation that followed his violent overreach. Former supporters quietly distanced themselves from his increasingly bitter rhetoric, leaving him alone in his oversized house, watching through curtained windows as the ranch he tried to destroy flourished beyond his reach. Clara's letters continued to arrive regularly, each one a treasure trove of connection and shared joy. Her latest news transforms understanding into celebration. She's expecting her first child. The letter trembles in Mariana's hands as she reads Clara's words aloud. If it's a girl, Thomas and I want to name her Maria, after the woman who taught me that strength and gentleness aren't opposites. And if it's a boy, we'd like to call him James, after Captain Morrison, whose memory finally found peace in your home. The gesture speaks to healing that has rippled outward from their small ranch. Elias no longer carries his survival as shame, but as responsibility, to honor those who died by living fully, to shelter the vulnerable as others once sheltered him. The tree they planted during those desperate early days has grown beyond all expectations. What began as a slender sapling barely taller than Rosita now reaches toward the sky with branches strong enough to cast meaningful shade. Beneath it sits a wooden bench where the family gathers each evening, a ritual that has become their creation story, the daily retelling of how three separate people became an unbreakable family. This evening, as the sun paints the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rosita asks the question that has become their favorite tradition. Tell me again about the day we became a real family. The stories pour out. Mariana's arrival at the train station, the wild horses' gradual trust, the winter nights by the fire when walls came down and hearts opened, the moment they chose to fight for each other rather than surrender to fear. Each telling adds new details, deepens understanding, strengthens the bonds that hold them together. But tonight, Mariana adds something new to their familiar narrative. Her hand finds Elias's scarred one, and her voice carries the weight of absolute certainty when she speaks words that have become their family's deepest truth. Some roots are born from pain, mija, but those are the ones that grow into the strongest trees because they know what it means to fight for good soil. Satswant, the words settle over them like a blessing as the stars begin to appear in the vast Texas sky. Around them, the ranch breathes with the quiet confidence of a place where love has been planted, tended, and allowed to flourish despite every attempt to destroy it. In the distance, the wild horse lifts its head and whinnies once, not in fear or anger, but in recognition of belonging. The sound carries across the plains like a promise that some things, once claimed by courage and defended by love, can never truly be taken away. Their story proves that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to stand together when the world tries to tear you apart. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow in the most unlikely soil, tended by hearts that understand the true meaning of home. If this story of unexpected family and hard-won belonging touched your heart, there are more tales of love and resilience waiting to be shared.